this has been a long time coming. You guys have wanted the New Zealander to review the New Zealand uh YouTube video, so here I am doing the work for the people, trying to fix my mic. I don't really know what you guys want me to comment on. I guess you just kind of want me to see what this guy says and either confirm or deny it, but this guy is pretty bloody accurate with most of his videos, real life lore. Like this is not a guy who gets stuff wrong on purpose. So, alright, well, let's give it a watch. We'll see what happens. Maybe I'll correct him on a few.
People actually live in New Zealand. As you can see, nearly 80% of the country's land area is completely uninhabited by humans. Which is kind of weird when you think about it at first, because New Zealand is both probably bigger than you think it is and has a very good climate for people to live in.
Yep.
The South Island and the North Island are respectively the 12th and 14th largest islands in the world, and if placed over the United States, they would stretch across the east coast from Florida up through Pennsylvania.
So, fun fact about that. So scientists actually think New Zealand was originally a part of, like, Australia, which, no shit, Sherlock, like, anyone can tell that. But if you take this part here and put it on the very eastern side of Australia, you get a near perfect,
Together, the two main islands in New Zealand are even larger than the
cohesion.
United Kingdom, and just like the UK, they share an almost identical climate, with similar temperatures all throughout the year and similar levels of rainfall. The Köppen designated climate type for the UK, Ireland, and the vast majority of New Zealand is oceanic and temperate, typically consisting of no dry season, warm summers, and mild winters.
I do have people who ask me this occasionally. So this here is our tallest building, right? This is the Sky City building. I forget what it's actually called, which is pretty bad actually. Most of you Americans, right, out there, this is our tallest building. Your average like skyscrapers in America would probably reach up to here on it. And the reason why is just because we're so like we get so many earthquakes that having big tall buildings you can't do it because they'll just fall over. I mean, in Christchurch, it is. I'm pretty sure it's now. I don't think it's considered illegal, but you have to get several like permits and very very good structural engineering to be able to build a a building over 4 floors. You've got to stick to 3 floors or under if you're just going standard building. Otherwise, it's got to have all these kinds of reinforcements and everything.
Oceanic and temperate, typically consisting of no dry season, warm summers, and mild winters. If you look at a worldwide map of where this climate type and similar climates can be found, they include several of the most densely populated places in the world,
Yeah.
like most of Western Europe, Vancouver, Mexico City, Lima and Cusco, Johannesburg, and the actually settled parts of southeastern Australia.
Yep.
One of the largest outliers here is, of course, New Zealand, who, despite having an overall climate that is nearly identical to the United Kingdom and is even
Yep.
larger in size, it's
United Kingdom and actually also where are we? Italy as well. I think, is this Italy? Looks like a boot. Yep. Italy. Spain and Portugal, not really, but Italy, especially northern Italy, you can get quite similar to New Zealand.
also vastly less populated. The UK has a population today that is nearing 69 million people.
I will say though, like in terms of one-to-one comparisons, Ireland is like near perfect. Like near perfect in terms of comparison. You could honestly confuse the two.
While New Zealand barely has a hair more than 5 million, or nearly 14 times fewer people. In fact, New Zealand's combined landmass has a lower population than a ton of other smaller islands around the world,
Yep.
all despite their larger size and more ideal climate. Most evidenced of all by the smaller islands like Java, Honshu, and Great Britain, all of which are smaller than
Yes.
New Zealand and yet have orders of magnitude more people living on them.
Yep.
To really hit the point home here, the population density in the UK is on average 281 people per square kilometer, while in New Zealand,
That's
it's only
insane.
18 people per square kilometer.
Yeah, bro. Okay. So in here, I'm just gonna put it in here, through down in here, this sort of area, there's like a bunch of small villages. In here, the like average, how should we say, density per kilometer, like you said, is something like 2 people per kilometer squared. This is insane to me. I couldn't live this. I just couldn't.
The UK is therefore 15 times as densely populated as New Zealand is. So, why is New Zealand so much more comparatively empty despite the similar size and similar climate? The answers are complex and fascinating, but the thing about New Zealand's population pattern is
Oh, yeah. So that's the Southern Alps over there. These are all the Canterbury Plains. This is near a place called Rangura, actually. Maybe slightly more north, actually.
that it only appears to get even stranger the more and more you actually look at it. Remember that something like 80% of the country is just totally uninhabited. But note that
So we were over here in that photo. We're like kind of up here, looking over here. This way.
difference in that amount of uninhabited land between the two main islands. The vast majority of New Zealand's population, more than 3/4 of them, all live more clustered together up on the North Island, while less than a quarter of them live much more spread out across the geographically larger South Island. So the smaller North Island has a lot more people than the South Island
Wonder
does.
why he's not including Bluff. Small island down the bottom doesn't get a say, I guess.
But even then, almost half of all the North Islanders just live around the primary city of New Zealand, Auckland.
Yep.
This is
Yep. We call everyone who lives here the Jaffas, right? Jaffa. Just another fucker from Auckland.
by far the biggest city that New Zealand has got. Strategically located along an isthmus with good natural harbors to the north and the south and placed over a dormant volcanic field with fairly fertile soils, the Auckland region alone is home to some 37% of all modern New Zealanders and is fast approaching a population of 2 million people. This high concentration of people around just one city makes New Zealand one of the most highly centralized countries anywhere in the developed world. For the sake of comparison, these are the percentages of a few other countries' populations and their biggest cities.
If you guys ever go to Auckland, and like I mean this from the bottom of my heart, like Auckland is a great place to go if you're from the city in another country. If you are from another country and you are looking for a city to go to, Auckland is definitely the one, but just be aware that it is extraordinarily, how do I say this? It is kind of like the New York of New Zealand. It is, you get city, and that includes all the bad stuff and all the good stuff, right? Everything's ease of access, but because everything's ease of access, there's a whole shit ton of people in it. And for a country that's, you know, like New Zealand, that's world renowned for its beauty, you know, I think going to the city is a bit of a waste, to be honest, but hey man, you do what you want to.
From around the world. So including Auckland, the North Island is home to 4 out of 5 of New Zealand's largest cities, with the largest down on the South Island being Christchurch, placed upon the flat plains of Canterbury. But if you exclude the
Canterbury. Canterbury.
urban area around Christchurch, the population density across the rest of the South Island, an island that's roughly the same size as the Netherlands plus another half of Belgium, is basically almost barren at only about 5.4 people per square kilometer on average.
Yep. So, I'll tell you why. This, obviously, you can see here is just completely mountainous, right? It is all mountains. There is a small strip that runs along the entirety of here, and there's actually people who live here. Like, it's not as barren as he's making it out. There's actually quite a few homes and houses and cities, like, in this sort of area around here. There's a small strip where people can live. But here, you get all of the winds that come from the howling 50s, no, the howling 40s and the rushing 50s, I think it's called. It's essentially this, that you imagine an Earth, right? You imagine Earth, and on the, like, on New Zealand, and between New Zealand and Antarctica, there's this strip of water that runs around that wraps around the entire Earth. This is where, like, the Australian heat and the Antarctic, like, cold move air, like, extraordinarily fast around the globe. And so this side is in the howling 40s, and it gets absolutely battered with some of the most rain, I think, on the planet, if I'm not mistaken. It is rain constantly. And the problem is because these mountains here, right, are so tall. Because if you look at New Zealand from like a straight on point of view, if you were to sit down here, if you were to sit down here and take a a direct angle shot of New Zealand straight on, you get a fucking triangle because that's how just pointy these mountains are. They're fucking huge for the size of the country. And so what happens is all of the rain gets taken in here, right? And it runs into these lakes, it runs down here into the river and out. That's why there's so many rivers and lakes and everything in the middle here. Now, what happens is this causes a sort of rain blocking effect where all the rain gets dumped here due to the pressure, and then as the cold air then comes over here, it actually warms up because it's just dumped all of its water, and it makes this completely like desolate. This is like snow, wetlands, like dry as fuck, and then it gets sort of temperate again, and it's like okay, and that's why everyone kind of lives in these areas. But like in here, it is just hot. It is hot and dry, and like you can't build out here.
About as empty as the states of North and South Dakota in the United States. And this is actually strange today because historically, back during the 19th and early 20th centuries, it was actually the South Island that had more people on it than the North Island. Now, of course, the biggest and most obvious factor explaining New
Reason for that, by the way, was because of in a city called Cromwell, especially. Yeah, Cromwell. I think there's quite a few other ones as well. There is a insane amount of gold. There was. And I think there still kind of is. New Zealand is one of the few places on Earth where you, as an untrained, like gem finder, if you will, can literally just go to a river and find gems. And the reason why is because it's just so abundant. Like, it's not as if you can just spy them with your, like, bare eyes. But if you took like a spade and then did a little bit of sifting, you would find gold. Like I can guarantee it.
New Zealand's relative emptiness is simply its
So long
sheer
as you knew what you were
isolation
doing.
away from the rest of the world. There are some cartographers who prefer to divide the planet into two separate halves, the land hemisphere and the water hemisphere. And within the water hemisphere, New Zealand is placed almost directly within the center. The
Yeah.
closest other large land
This, by the way, is the reason why because a lot of countries, including Australia, actually like went in on us because we got rid of our last few jets that we had in our air force. But the problem is, even if China or anyone else wanted to invade us, right? We give next to no like positional advantage in war. If anything, we're so far out of the way that it doesn't fucking matter. Like, the only reason you would come here and try to, like, get us is to set up some sort of, like, fucking plan to attack Australia. And even if you do that, Australia's just gonna get you first, bro. You've got next to nothing to work with here.
mass to them is, of course, Australia, but they are separated by nearly 2,000 kilometers across the open ocean of the Tasman Sea. And other than that, it's all just scattered islands, Antarctica.
Also, just as well, this through here is like some of the roughest waters you can get, and as well as like across here, through here. In here is really rough. So if you were going to try and mount any sort of attack from New Zealand, you would need to bring your own stuff, which just makes it like there's no reason to try and overtake us. You are literally losing money by doing so.
Or open, empty ocean for thousands of kilometers away in every single direction. Even today, because there's simply so little to note down here, air and maritime traffic around the South Pacific is the most empty spot on the globe. It still takes a nearly 4-hour flight just to hop between Auckland and Sydney, which is roughly comparable to a flight between London and Athens across the whole of Europe.
Yep.
And that's just New Zealand's closest neighbor. For most of Europe, New Zealand is quite literally the furthest place away they can get without leaving the
Portugal,
planet
Spain,
itself in a
yep.
space. Because New Zealand exists precisely on the opposite side side of the world from much of modern-day Spain and Portugal. It simply takes time for people to get to or get off New Zealand even in the 21st century. And it
Yep.
is because of this extreme isolation from
Oh, that's so. This is the Inter-Islander. It's leaving Picton, is going to Wellington.
the rest of the world that New Zealand was always fated to become the final large habitable landmass on the Earth's surface to ever be discovered by humans.
Yep.
It remained an isolated, perfectly untouched by humans ecosystem throughout all of history and civilization until a group of Polynesian explorers likely happened to stumble upon it by mere chance sometime during the 13th century, at about the same time as Genghis Khan and the Mongols were rampaging across Eurasia. From
Yep.
there, over the span of centuries, the initial Polynesian settlers developed a unique culture of their own, the Maori, and they remained
All right, I need to teach you guys because you guys see this word. You guys see the word like Maori, and you say it like that. It's Maori. This is not Maori. Yeah, this is. I don't know. I don't even know how you would put that into spelling for you guys. I mean, for me, it's just the Maori. You know, like.
disturbed on the islands by any other humans from the outside world until the mid-17th century, when a Dutch sailor became the first non-Polynesian to ever discover and visit them. But
Yeah.
sustained and lasting European contact with the islands didn't really begin later until 1769, when the British sailor Captain Cook visited the islands nearly 5 centuries after the Maori had first discovered and settled them.
Yeah.
Simply put, other islands around the world like Great Britain, Java, Honshu, and many others have just had far more time to develop and expand their populations than New Zealand has. Many of these islands have been settled by humans for
So, fun fact about ye old Captain Cook's voyage: when he ended up coming into New Zealand, his men were so sick of sailing and so full of tensions, if you will, that when the Māori first saw how useful these things called nails are, which you hammer in a nail and it sticks to things. Essentially, they were trading their like women to have intercourse with for nails. And so what happened is they nearly got themselves stranded in New Zealand, the old Captain Cook did, because they would just rip the nails out of the boat that they needed to get home. And they kept doing it, and eventually the captain had to be like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, lads, hold the fuck on. Hold on. We're not gonna have a ship soon."
tens of thousands of years, simply because they exist nearer to the edges of major continental landmasses and were thus discovered by people millennia before New Zealand ever was. As recently as the 13th century, New Zealand's human population was literally zero, whereas other medieval islands like Japan and Great Britain already numbered in the millions,
Yeah.
about where New Zealand is only at today in the 21st century.
Yep.
Having more people to start with simply means having more people later on, as more people are available to reproduce. And the Maori of New Zealand were starting completely from scratch just 800 years ago, which really isn't that long ago historically, based on several assumptions and not rooted in anything really other than basically guesswork. Modern demographers usually estimate that the Maori population on New Zealand likely numbered around 200,000 individuals after 5 centuries of living there by the time the British arrived. And
Yep.
subsequently, their population began to crash significantly.
Yep.
By 1840, the British Empire began formally incorporating New Zealand into a colonial possession, and a flood of immigrants to the islands coming from Britain and Ireland began.
So this isn't quite true. So Ireland, yes. British up here in these areas, yes. But down here, not really. This was more Scottish. So, like, obviously Scottish, part of Britain, but like you get the point. Like, really, because when you think Britain, you think UK as well. You think of England, right? Really, just down here, it was literally, especially in these two areas, it was literally just Ireland and Scottish people. No one else. Because down here, it is freezing. It is fucking frigid down here.
Through a combination of various factors like European-introduced diseases that the Maori lacked any immunities to, warfare and violence between the colonizers and the indigenous Maori, and the forced introduction of a brand new legal and justice system that was unfamiliar to them, the Maori population of New Zealand plummeted from around 200,000 at the time of contact in 1769 to only around 40,000 a tad more than a century later in 1890. But by that point, around 500,000 white European colonists, mostly coming from Britain and Ireland, had arrived to the islands and mostly replaced.
And he is allowed to say white here. And the reason why is because people of color, you know, your blacks, your Asians, weren't allowed anywhere near the island. Not until, I think, about 100 years later, after World War II, was when they were allowed in. And even then, like, Asians were essentially used as slaves. Like, literally, I'm not even joking. Asians were essentially hired from the countries that they were from to mine gold in these, like, more arid areas down here in sort of the South Island, like Cromwell and stuff like that. And, yeah.
Them. Now, initially during the colonization process, most of the new European settlers who came decided to set up shop down on the South Island, because the North Island was a lot more inhabited by the indigenous Maori, and so more of the colonial wars and violence were taking place up there, and also because gold got discovered down on the South Island. It wouldn't be until the 20th century that the North Island would recover its larger share of the population. But it was basically always destined to happen and get to the point where we are today, where over 3/4 of everyone live up on the North Island. Because, as it turns out, the South Island is actually pretty difficult to build any civilization on.
Well, yes, but there is actually more, like, okay. What you gotta understand.
For starters,
all of this down here, this, like, green that you see, is all farmland. All of it. Because we fuck around with meat and dairy exports.
South Island is significantly more mountainous than the North Island is. This is because beneath the surface, New Zealand exists precisely along the intersection of the Pacific and Australian tectonic plates. But beneath the South Island, the westward moving Pacific plate is crashing into and
howling 40s and the screaming 50s, that's it.
Subducting beneath the northwest moving Australian plate. Over the past 45 million years, the collision of these two plates here has thrust up 20 kilometers worth of rocks to form the Southern Alps, running along nearly the entire length of the whole South Island. And their name is fitting because this mountain range really is about on a par with the scale of the original Alps in Europe. There are 18 peaks in this range that exceed 3,000 meters in elevation, while the tallest of them stands at more than 3,700 meters and is nearly as high as the iconic Mount Fuji in Japan. For comparison's sake, these mountains tower over anything that can be found over in Australia. The tallest mountain that Australia has to offer is Mount Kosciuszko, and it's about 1,500 meters lower than this tallest mountain on New Zealand's South Island. Economically developing humongous mountains
oh no, that's the video. Oof.
Is a challenging task, because building anything around them or through them is just more expensive and labor intensive than it is on more ideal, flatter lands. But taking up a lot of otherwise available space on the South Island isn't the only problem to development that the mountains here pose. They extend for about 500 kilometers across the whole island and carve out only a narrow strip of land to their west that is actually exposed to the prevailing westerly winds that blow across the Tasman Sea. So as a consequence, moist air blowing with the prevailing winds will almost immediately hit the Southern Alps, which will form clouds that dump a torrential amount of rainfall all across the narrow western coastal strip. But as the winds travel further over the mountains, they lose their moisture and get warmer as they cross over and then descend down towards the mountain's eastern side, where they then become hot and dry winds that blow across the island's eastern side.
So New Zealand, actually, funnily enough, in spite of being in its position where it is, this is so prevalent. We actually have, I believe, a desert up in here, as well as a few in here, maybe. I don't know if they're considered deserts, though, but I know that this one up here is. There is a desert, like, somewhere up in here.
As a result, not only do the mountains on the South Island take up a lot of the available space away from development, but they cast a deep rain shadow across the flat plains of the island's eastern half that turns them generally into arid plains.
Yep. Straight out of a fucking movie. I have been here before. I have been here many times. I'll tell you what though, if you want to go like here in winter, it's actually very good. Make sure it's not snowing because no shit. But coming here in winter and seeing all this that like while it's actually somewhat healthy because these plants are green in winter. Um Not significantly more green, mind you, but like there would be a river here and stuff like this. It's very dry in summer though, incredibly dry.
and often subjugates them to drought-like conditions. So essentially, land on the eastern side of the island is generally flatter and easier to develop,
Yeah.
but it also receives too little rainfall to make growing crops a sustainable venture. While the western side of the island is extremely rugged with far less available flat space and probably too much rain.
Yeah.
Conversely, while still fairly mountainous in its own right, the North Island is a lot less mountainous than the South Island is. There's more available flat land up there that's easier to develop. Rainfall across the North Island is more evenly distributed and predictable than the South Island since there aren't as many big mountains to disrupt weather patterns. And since New Zealand is in the southern hemisphere and the North Island is further north closer to the equator, especially extending into the isthmus where Auckland is located, temperatures on the North Island are warmer on average than further down in the south closer to the pole. And while there's a lot of volcanoes on both islands, all of the volcanoes on the South Island are currently dormant and none of them have erupted in centuries.
No. No, none of them have. I think Banks Peninsula was the last ever recorded, and that was like 2,000 years ago, so.
Conversely, volcanoes on the North Island are still active, and there have been a few small eruptions out of them from time to time over the past several decades, which have produced a limited amount of fertile volcanic soils on the island that are completely absent down on the South Island altogether.
Yep.
So flatter land, more reliable and evenly distributed rainfall, warmer temperatures, and marginally better soils all mean a better ability to conduct agriculture, and a better ability to simply sustain more people on the North Island. And so after the gold on the South Island ran out and the violence in the North Island ended, it was only really a matter of time before the North Island ended up with more than 3/4 of the total population.
Yep.
But nonetheless, it's not like the North Island possesses a huge ability to host a lot of people either. While active volcanism
I am sorry to interrupt, but I am just gonna put in here that is where we get our accents from. And in fact, if we hold on, if we go back to this like sort of picture of the country. So if you're looking at this, right, up in here, you have the traditional New Zealand like accent traveling all the way through here. Okay? All the way through, all the way through. As you get further south, you start to transition back to our roots. Because you got to remember, settlers have only been here for around 200 odd years. Like not really enough time to develop a huge accent difference. And if you go like further and further south, you actually, especially in here and here, and even really up to really Christchurch at about this sort of cutoff point here, um, you actually just have a very, very southern Scottish Irish accent, and that is like the kind of like the difference between New Zealand and Australia, if you will. So a lot of people can't really tell the difference between a New Zealand accent and a Australian accent. And what it has to do with is Australian was essentially purely British accent. So when you think of Australian, you think of a baseline British accent, but ultra southern. Australian is essentially an ultra southern British accent. New Zealand accent is sort of a mishmash combination of Irish Scottish, an ultra southern Irish Scottish accent. And so one of the ways you can pick up on this is so a Australian, when they pronounce their vowels, let's say the word Nick, right? So an Australian would say neck, right? Neck. Now we would say nick. Big difference. And it's all in the baseline accent that obviously started not terribly long ago, but long ago. Yeah. So just a wee thing for you there. Yeah, yeah. So neck, nook. Neck being like Australian, nook being uh, a New Zealander. But to be fair, I am exaggerating a lot on the Australian side. Like the problem is the further south Australia you go, the more it becomes similar to our accent, and the further north in New Zealand you go, the more it becomes similar to Australian because there are more British settlers up here. And by British I mean English. Mm. Maori's different. So the Maori accent comes from the Polynesian stuff. So that would be you'd probably find your similarity to be like a Tongan accent or an Islander accent. Yeah. Mm. Right. Anyway, continue. Sorry, sidetracked.
More people on the North Island. And so after the gold soils, these eruptions don't really happen that often, and they're usually pretty minor events.
Yeah.
There have only been a grand total.
So when most people country have a volcano go off, it's like reported on the news as an event, and it's like you must not approach all of this. You do not approach this. You don't go anywhere near this. No one goes anywhere near this without my permission, says the sheriff, right? Um, but in New Zealand, our volcano activities are so minor that it like what they do is there's like a little station on the side of the road that goes past like some of the volcanoes that are up in the North Island, and if someone's there and they're waving you, you just kind of stop, and then the volcano erupts, and then about however long after it's erupted, like 15 minutes later, you just go by. Because it like literally all that happens is it spits out a few balls of magma and maybe coughs up a bit of ash. That's it. Like that's so minor.
Total of 13 significant volcanic eruptions across all of New Zealand over the entirety of the past 1,800 years of history. The North Island itself has only seen 4 very minor eruptions over the past century, while the South Island, of course, has seen exactly 0. Conversely, Japan experiences an average of 15 volcanic events every single year, while just a single volcano out of dozens of active volcanoes on the Indonesian island of Java has erupted 6 times only since 2018. As a result, the soils of several Indonesian and Japanese islands get more minerals deposited within them more frequently from all the ash that falls.
And for those of you wondering why New Zealand doesn't grow shit, this is why. We don't have enough. Our lands are so poor in terms of fertility. They're just stony, incredibly stony. There are some parts of New Zealand where the lands are quite nice, and they have so like take Christchurch again for example. Christchurch has a mixture of very good soil and very bad soil. And the reason for it is because underneath Christchurch is a lake, a underground lake, right? And the Christchurch people, they drink from this lake. So the water supply, everything is hooked up to the lake, and because it's naturally filtered, you get natural lake water from underneath the city. And when I say underneath, I don't mean like directly underneath. It is miles beneath, but it is this big underwater lake that's in a massive cave, and the city sits on top and the citizens get a drink out of it. And because there's water moving and it's all flowing and everything's sort of working, the soil is actually pretty fertile in some areas. But for the majority of New Zealand, it is just rocks. It is, and there are so many of them because it's just so is geologically dead. Like there is no minerals in the in the surface area at all. So plants just don't have a good time here. That's why the plants that do have a good time are very hardy plants. Your pines, things are like that.
falls from volcanoes. And so they are therefore just more fertile and easier to grow crops in than New Zealand, where volcanism is more dormant and rarely even happens. And so where the soils are consequently far less frequently fertilized naturally. So ultimately, because of all the mountains, dormant volcanoes, hills, and arid plains.
I mean, there you go. Like, that's perfect. Look at this. Pine trees for miles and then nothing. Absolutely nothing at all. These down here, these are actually all cranberry bushes. Are they cranberry bushes? I think they're yeah, I think they are. But, yeah. Like, these, you get the odd spruce, but the problem with spruce plants in New Zealand is, because New Zealand is, like, actually, like, wet. Like, it's a wet country. They come from Australia. And the problem is here, they don't root deep enough in order to remain stable because they only go as deep as they need to for the water. Pines go really deep because they can withstand having a huge amount of water in them. But spruces can't. And so what happens is you have someone who has a spruce and it falls over. Because they go down like maybe a meter, 2 meters, and then a big wind comes and just blows it over.
Taking up most of the space, accompanied by weird rainfall patterns and a lack of very good soil. The vast majority of New Zealand is simply not very good for commercial crop growing. Less than 2% of the country's total landmass is actually considered arable and suitable for crop cultivation, a percentage that is actually comparable to countries like Jordan and Somalia, that each largely exist in a much more hostile desert environment. But unlike those countries in the desert, while New Zealand's land is mostly not very suitable for crop growing, its temperate climate, easily available water in some locations, and plentiful grasses make it largely perfect for grazing and ranching. So instead of growing crops, New Zealand just brought in a ton of cows and sheep and built its entire agricultural industry off of animals instead. The meme about there being more sheep in New Zealand than humans is very true because of this factor.
Every New Zealand citizen could own 5 sheep, I believe.
There are nearly 27 million sheep on the islands today in comparison to just 5.1 million humans. And with sheep, New Zealand found its perfect niche in the world market, because they are now the #1 largest exporter of sheep products like wool and mutton in the world.
It's not our main though. Our main's I think our main is actually milk powder, like specifically milk solids. I think I think it is milk powder. That would be interesting to have a look at. I think
But that's not even their largest export.
Oh, okay,
New Zealand also has more than twice as many cows on their islands as they do people. And so it's actually dairy products that they produce from all these cows that make up their largest single export. So despite only 2% of their land being considered arable, 55% of New Zealand's land is still being used for agriculture anyway. It's just pretty much all being used for raising animals instead of growing crops. In a way, New Zealand's geography sort of forced it into basically becoming an offshore European ranch. After the gold ran out in the late 19th century, there weren't really any other lucrative minerals around to dig up or any oil and gas to extract and sell to world markets. Its very limited ability to grow crops and remoteness from the rest of the world essentially ensured that despite their large geographic size, the islands would always have a fairly small population. And a small population plus the very far distance away from the primary 3 global consumer markets in Europe, East Asia, and North America meant that New Zealand would never be able to develop a competitive manufacturing sector like happened in other island states like Japan and the United Kingdom, who can both grow a lot more food to sustain more people. And
the logistics for getting stuff from here to China only really works because of trade deals with Australia. I mean, I think we do ship directly to the Asian market. We do not for Europe or North America, I don't believe. Shipping to Australia and then through Australia is the only way it works, and it only works because we're so close as a pair of countries. In fact, I think I heard at one point that we actually have the friendliest relationship in terms of country dynamics, like across the globe. Apparently, literally no one on the planet has better trading deals, uh, like trading in general, and just overall citizenship. Because you, as a New Zealander, can go to Australia and just immediately get citizenship, and vice versa. It's the you can. You can just fuck off to Australia and you'll be fine.
And are closer by to major consumer markets to export their finished goods to. Thus, New Zealand's only ability to generate capital through exports was by raising biological animal resources like sheep and cows, which they are very, very good at producing and trade in exchange for things like manufactured products and oil and gas. In fact, New Zealand now produces so much food through this process that they produce enough to feed around 40 million people a year,
Yep.
or around 8 times their own population. Obviously, they don't really need that much food, so 95% of it gets exported to over 100.
I'm kidding you not. I know exactly where this is. I need to, you know what? Someone needs to 1v1 me. We need to get like a GeoGuessr like pro, or maybe not quite a pro because they're probably too good for me. But we need to get them to 1v1 me in my own country. I think I would have a very good chance of winning.
Different countries around the world.
Not against Rainbow, bro. That cunt's that he's calling out the Wellington Zoo wall. Are you serious, brother?
Which in 2019 earned them over 46 billion New Zealand dollars in revenue. Animal agriculture is the primary pillar of New Zealand's exports. It has been that way for nearly 200 years and will likely continue being that way in the future, because it's really the only competitive export that geography actually grants New Zealand. But because that's the case,
alright, look, we're gonna get a slightly political here for a second, okay? And this goes for Australia as well, actually. Do not be vegan in either of these countries. You will attract more attention than you want. Okay? We don't mind if you're a vegetarian and you go around and just sort of do your own thing. As soon as you start like advocating for veganism in Australia and New Zealand, it's over for you. I'm sorry. But like for example, this happened not too long ago. This vegan woman went absolutely batshit insane. I can't remember exactly what she did. In response, every single one of the people from her street got out a barbecue, went to the front of her house, just outside the boundary from it, started up their barbecues in a line that was like it was like 50 or 60 barbecues long, and started spit roasting pork. Don't do it. Like, if you're gonna go to any country, like, don't do it in these countries. We accept we accept pescatarian, very much pescatarian. In fact, you guys are preferred because fish is fucking good. Get us more, okay? Pescatarian. We got what do we got? Your vegetarian. We don't mind the old vegetarians because they eat their veggies, and you know that's good. We actually don't mind vegans, but don't go advocating for veganism in these countries. It's not going to end well. It just will not.
animal agriculture takes up over half of New Zealand's total
and especially in South New Zealand. If you go down here and you start advocating for veganism, you're going to get shot. You're going to get shot. Someone's going to purposely mistake you for a deer. Because this is hunting country down here. Hunting country. Don't do it. Don't do it. And up here, you might get away with it. And through here, up here you can definitely get away with it. It's fine. No one cares up here because it's Auckland. They're Jaffas, right?
Available land, and so limits the ability for, and just like in the rest of the developed world, New Zealand's birth rates have also dropped beneath the natural replacement level, but they haven't been there for as long as they have been in other countries. As recently as
I do just want to point this out though, and I think a lot of people tend to forget this when it comes to the whole birth rate argument. 40 or really 50 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago, when our parents and maybe you guys who are watching this, some of you, were having children, uh, it wasn't because you wanted to. It's because it was expected, right? And I think this is a bit of a trend across the globe where back in the old days, if you didn't have kids, it's because you couldn't. Not because you didn't want to, but because you couldn't. The expectations is that you would find a partner while you were still very young and have children. Um that expectation has fallen by the wayside and has fallen out of favor massively. And like so you have a great variety of people. I mean, I have a mate who's 22, I think. He's having a child. He's had a child actually. No, he's had a child. Um and and that is incredibly rare nowadays in terms of like having children that early. Um but that's what I mean. Like, it's just not an expectation for you to have a child anymore. Your parents might like you might like to, but it's not an expectation anymore compared to where it was back then. If you could have a child, you would, and if you couldn't, that was the only reason you wouldn't have one. It was assumed if you didn't have a kid, it was automatically assumed there was something wrong with you. So
2010, the birth rate in New Zealand was still 2.1 children per woman on average,
yeah.
precisely at the level required to keep the population stable. As of 2022, the rate has slightly decreased beneath the replacement level to 1.8 children per woman, but that is still higher than in many other developed countries like Germany, Italy, Japan, and South Korea. And unlike Japan and South Korea, New Zealand has and continues to have a very long history of immigration to the islands from abroad. New Zealand itself is a settler society where no human being there today has any direct ancestry from the islands going back beyond 800 years.
Yep.
And where nearly all of the European descended population doesn't even have ancestry there going back 200 years.
Yep. So my great grandfather, he wasn't here.
Throughout its history since 1840, when the British began the period of mass immigration, most of New Zealand's population growth has always come from immigrants. But the pace of immigration has recently begun growing even faster. For about a century after the British began mass migration to New Zealand, racist policies were put into place that deliberately restricted the numbers of non-white immigrants allowed to come to the islands, which kept the numbers of immigrants coming in artificially capped and limited growth and density. After all, there were only really so many white Europeans who wanted to uproot their lives and travel to the opposite end of the world for a new—
And almost all of them were Irish, literally, because back then Ireland itself was just under someone else's thumb when it came to the problems they were having, and so people just wanted to get out of here, like just leave it, and so they came over to New Zealand.
new life in New Zealand. It therefore took centuries after its initial discovery by the Maori for New Zealand to even hit 1 million people around 1911. The racist policies restricting the numbers of non-whites coming in were only relaxed after World War II. And so it took another 45 years from 1 million people for them to hit 2 million. Then another 20 years to hit 3 million, and then another 30 years to hit 4 million. But after 4 million people were reached in 2006, it only took a mere 14 more years to add in another million people and reach 5 million by 2020.
Yep.
And the vast majority of all that recent growth came from immigration from new places.
Yep.
Beginning in 2008, the New Zealand government—
Immigration around the world is becoming an issue, and like a lot of people also, again, politics, but the one question I ask people who want people to immigrate into their country, especially illegally in case of America, how do you expect your country to protect them when your country can't even protect yourselves? And I don't mean that in terms of, your guys' fighting capacity, because clearly you guys have a military. I'm talking about your own survival. Like everyone in the world is struggling with money, including in America. Everyone is struggling with money. And inviting these people in is making it worse for you as citizens. You are sabotaging your country to allow these people in. I don't understand this mindset. I can't comprehend it. And the same is happening in New Zealand, where and there are rules being made against it. So, like, for example, I don't know if it's in yet, but I know there was a law that tried to get passed, or like a rule change or something, that if New Zealand if New Zealand finds a Chinese citizen, for example, who has bought a country, or sorry, bought a house in New Zealand, and it's just sitting there unoccupied, they can't do that anymore. And that's what they had been doing, is like people from overseas, particularly Asia, would buy up huge quantities of housing and just space in New Zealand, and then just let it sit there to appreciate, and then they would sell it for a enormous price. And that's how you have Auckland getting to where it is today with the house prices, because it's just it just kills house prices.
Government set a target of 45,000 new immigrants to the country a year, plus an additional tolerance of up to 5,000 more. Between 2013 and 2018 alone, 270,000 new immigrants came to New Zealand from abroad. The United Kingdom still represents the largest single country that immigrants come to New Zealand from, as former UK residents still represent roughly 1 in 20 people in the country, but most immigrants today don't come from Europe as a whole any longer. They're coming from Asia instead, and primarily from China, India, and the Philippines. Today, over 27% of the whole New Zealand population were born somewhere else outside of the country, a rate that is among the highest seen anywhere in the world, and a rate that is likely to continue increasing even further in the future. But the new immigrants who are coming to the country aren't settling everywhere all at once. For the most part, they're basically just settling around the largest city with the best flight connections to the outside world where they originally came from, Auckland. Between the 20 years between 1996 and 2016, more than half of all New Zealand's total population growth took place exclusively around the Auckland region. A growth rate that many in the city are concerned is not very sustainable.
It's both, okay. It's not only not sustainable, it's just stupid. Like, I think the average salary in Auckland is like, I think it's $48,000, and an average house price in Auckland is 1.1 million. Like, do you see the average annual income for a household is, not for a household, but for a person, is like 48 million, not 48 million, $48,000. And then houses are costing 1.1 million. What are you going to do? Auckland is one of the most livable cities in the world. Like, it's literally on the top 10 most livable cities in the world. I think it's number 8, I think. Number 8 and number something or other. Anyway, besides the point. But to be able to live here, there is a bar of entry that is just insane. It's insane.
By 2022, the average house price in Auckland had swelled to over 1.1 million US dollars, all in a city where the average annual
US dollars, Jesus Christ.
salary
So 1.1 million US dollars in Kiwi dollars would be $2 million? Fucking hell.
remains just 44,000 US dollars. That's a ratio where the average house price in the city costs 25 years worth of the average salary, making Auckland one of the least affordable cities to own a home in the world. So while it is true that most of New Zealand remains pretty empty,
I know this place too. I've been here. Is this not between Twizel and Merriman? No, it's not, because that's... Oh, that's that. Oh, this is, yep.
most of it simply isn't possible to inhabit for all of the reasons explained in this video. And the small parts of the country that actually are inhabited are already struggling with providing enough housing for the people who are already there. In the future, who knows how much more populated these fascinating and isolated islands will become. But New Zealand's quotas on the numbers of people they allow in each year are rooted in logical and scientific thinking. They understand better than anyone today the natural limitations that their islands provide, and the realities they actually have to work with. And if you're anything like me, then you're probably just
Is this an ad? Okay, we're gonna skip the
Just
ad.
as curious.
You know what? Let's let him pitch the end of it at least. We'll let him. What's your code? We'll give you the code.
Here on your screen right now, or by visiting brilliant.org/real-life-lore down in the description.
There you go. Brilliant.org/real-life-lore if you want to do all that stuff. Really good video, actually. Literally, almost everything is accurate. Native Kiwi here. A lot of land is also protected due to conservation, and building construction has to follow strict and pretty expensive build code so that the building can survive the many earthquakes we get over here on a yearly basis. Acquiring materials to build is also a complete nightmare. Yup, absolutely. Yup. Everyone knew us for cows and milk. We didn't know for ages they thought we were sheep people. Next. No. Yeah. Yeah, no, like this is actually a very good video. Like as an introduction, Jesus Christ, this video has double my country's total views. Jesus Christ. Anyway, good video by Real Life Law. Go follow him. I actually really do recommend his content. Real Life Law has some absolute bangers about a lot of countries and also about history as well. Really good YouTube channel. I highly rate Real Life Law. I really do. So, for us here on Twitch, we're going to keep on going. I'm going to be attempting... I don't even know what I'm going to be attempting. We'll find that out in a second when I remember. For those of you who are on YouTube, this will be the end. Hopefully we'll see you in the next one. See ya. Bye.